All right, so welcome again to my YouTube channel, Tones Good TV. Our topic this day is about the probability and statistics, particularly random variable. Okay, our objectives for this tutorial, we have three objectives. First, illustrate a random variable, discrete and continuous, and also distinguish between a discrete and a continuous random variable, and find the possible values of random variables. Now let's proceed to the main topic that we're going to discuss this tutorial. Okay, when we talk about random variables, random variable is a specific characteristics or attribute with the population of interest that varies or changes to any individual or things. When you talk about variables, it involves about the characteristics of a certain things or or attribute with the populations. So for further discussion about these random variables, we have here example of the variables. For instance, we have the height and weight among grade 11 students. As you can observe in this sentence, the height and weight, this is now the example of the variables. It's because it defines about the characteristics or attribute with the population with a grade 11 students on their height and weight. Height and weight here is the example of the variables. Another thing is the emotional quotient among public school teachers. The characteristics among public school teachers here is the emotional quotient. Emotional quotient is best example of the variables. Another thing is the number of students who enrolled in Sunlor National High School. So another variable here is the number of students. The number of students talk about how many students enrolled in Sunlor National High School. So those are the example of variables. Okay, next. So we have also two types of variables. We have two types of variables. The first type of the variables is categorical or qualitative variables. When we talk about categorical or qualitative variables, these are the variables that are classified to some attributes or categories. What are those examples? Just like, for example, the gender. Gender is the best example of a variables that under the categories, different categories. For instance, gender, it can be female or male. So, daming categories about gender. Another thing is religion. Religions, there are many categories. There are many kinds of religions. Name of religions. Okay. Another thing is the political affiliations. Ang dami. Congressman, president, vice president. So that's the example of the categorical or qualitative variables. Okay. Another thing is the academic courses. Dami example ng academic courses. Pwede ka mag-teachers, mag-criminology, engineer, so on and so forth. But these words or phrases, this is the best example of the categorical or the qualitative variables. And the blood type. There are many kinds of blood type. We have the blood type, type O, type AB, so on and so forth. So this example or the best example of the categorical or the qualitative variables. We talk about some attributes or categories. Okay, that's categorical or qualitative variables. Another thing or another type of example of the categorical qualitative variable is the civil status. Single, married, so on and so forth. No? So that is example, another example of the categorical or qualitative variables. Next, numerical or the quantitative variables. When we talk about numerical or the quantitative variables, these are the variables that are classified according to numerical characteristics. Involves here the numbers. Okay, for instance, we have the temperature. Temperature is an example of the numerical quantitative variables because it involves the number. What is the temperature or what is the normal body temperature of a person? We have 37 degrees Celsius. So it involves about number. The height, it also involves number. Right? Next one is your weight. It involves weight, kilograms. Height is centimeter or whatsoever metric conversion that you need to use for this kind of measurement. Another thing is the average grade. Diba? Average grade is the best example also of the numerical quantitative variables. It involves about numbers and your scores in the quarterly examinations. Diba? Next one is your daily allowance and your average internet consumption. These examples here is best example for the numerical or quantitative variables. Okay, again, we have two types of variables, the categorical or the qualitative variables, and another one is the numerical or quantitative variables. In quantitative or numerical variables also, it classifies into two. We have here discrete variables. What is discrete variables? Discrete variables are the variables whose values are obtained by counting. Okay, so when we talk about counting, we use the whole number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. So the best example of the discrete variables here is the number of children who receive with polio vaccine. This sentence is best example of discrete variable because this emphasizes about the number of the children who receive with polio vaccine. The clue here is the word number. Okay. Another thing is a number of public utility jeepney registered in the Land Transportation Office. Another clue here is the number. Okay, so discrete variables is obtained by counting. Another classification of the numerical or quantitative variables, we have the continuous variables. These are the variables whose values are obtained by using measurement. Okay, when we talk about using measurement, we can use measurement about the temperature of the human using thermometer. Another thing is your age, diba? Another example is your height. You can use this about measuring your height. And also we have the distance. And we have also the IQ or intelligent quotient of a person. We have your weight. And we have temperature, age, height, distance, IQ, and weight. These words are the example of the continuous variables. Another best uh, difference of these two classifications about discrete variables and the continuous variables. When we talk about discrete, this is involves the number, whole number. But the continuous variables, this is also involve the decimal. For instance, temperature, magkakaroon tayo pwede ng temperature ng 37.6, so may decimal. Your height, pwede siyang 3.2 centimeter, di ba? The distance, di ba? Pwede siyang 30 kilometers, may point. So, kasali dito yung points or decimal. Unlike sa discrete variable, dapat exact talaga ang numbers dito. Decimal is not included in the discrete variables. Okay, so next one is, okay, we are about to discuss also the possible value of random variables. Okay, a variable is a random variable whose values are determined by chance or random event. The random variables are defined over discrete and continuous variable in a sample space as discrete random variables and continuous random variables respectively. Usually, letters in the alphabet are commonly used to represent random variables. Okay, we can use X whatsoever yung gagawin natin letter para ma-determine that those letter ay ginagamit natin as a random variable. Okay, para masabtan ang tanong. Okay. Another terms that we need to understand about the sample space. When we talk about sample space, this refers the total number of possible outcomes. We are talking about the possible outcomes. Okay. Another thing is the value of X here refers to the values of random variables. Or we can use X, Y, or kahit na anong alphabet na gagamitin natin, sabi ko kanina, in referring for the values of the random variables. Okay, for instance, okay, in tossing a coin twice, one may use capital letter X to denote a random variable in a statistical experiment. Okay, find the number of heads that is referred as X that will come out. Okay, how are we going to solve this one? First, you need to find the sample space or the possible outcomes, and the number of heads represent X as a random variable. But before we're going to determine the possible outcomes, we need to understand in a coin, we have two faces. The X, or we call this the heads, and also the tail or letter T. So, dalawang faces yung coin. Hari o patay. Okay, when we talk about hari, that is in English, tatawagin natin ito sa head, and patay is the tail. So, head and tail. How are we going to find the sample space in tossing a coin twice? Paano? Since isa lang ka coin, as you can observe, we have first toss and second event. Kaya dalawa lang pwedeng toss ang coin. As you can observe here, we have head and tail. Okay. We have head and tail. Pagkatapos for the first toes, we have head and tail here. And then head, another arrow. We have X and T for the second toes of a coin. And another T here is X and T. So, tingnan natin how we're going to find the possible values of this one. We have head, or X, X. We have X, X. This is the possible outcome. We have X, X. Ito, first possible outcome. Head and head. Second possible outcome, head and T. So we have X, T. Tapos na tayo sa head. Another possible outcome from here. So T and X. We have T, X. The tail and head. We have T and T. We have T, T. How many possible outcomes? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. There are also 4 events. Okay. 4 events or 4 possible outcomes. We need to make a tabular form para magpilihan po sa lahat. Dito. So we have event 1, 2, 3, 4. We have here the possible outcomes. We have X, 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 T, H, and P. So the question here is we are going to find the number of heads X. So the last column, we name it value of X, the number of heads. Okay. As you can observe, for the event 1 or the possible outcome 1 is we have X, X. We're going to find out how many possible outcomes ahead. So count it. 1, 2. We have 2 possible outcomes. For the second event, we have XT, only 1X. Therefore, there is 1. Another event is TH. We have also 1. And the fourth one is TP, walang head dyan. So, therefore, 0. Therefore, as you can observe, for event 1, may dalawang head. For the event 2, may isang head. For the event 3, isang head. And for the event 4, dalawang T, but there is no head. So, this is now how we're going to make in a tabular form to find the possible value of random variables. Okay, so another example. Suppose a sample of 3 production items is randomly selected from a manufacturing process and you are interested in determining the number of defective items. Okay, find the possible outcomes and the values y of the random variable y, where y is the number of defective items. Okay, so what are you going to do is let D for defective items and let N for non-defective items. Dalawa lang ang pinag-uusapan dito po, si defective at saka non-defective items. But there are 3 production items na ating i-select randomly kung may defecto ba siya or walang defecto. Okay. So, another, just let Y be the number of defective items. Bakit defective items? The question here is, find the possible outcomes and the values of Y of the random variable, where Y is the number of defective items. Okay. So, what you're going to do, we have 2 symbols, the D and D, using the tree diagram. Since kay tatlo ito, we can make it 3 We can make it three, anong sabi ito? Progression para makita natin mamaya kung paano maggawa ng tree diagram. Ito, the first one is D and N. Okay. D and N, ito D and N. Okay. Pagkatapos sa D po, sa first na selection, we have D and N. The second selection we have sa D, we have D, N. And the third selection, we have this one, the third selection. And also for the non-defective, we have N, we have ND, and pagkatapos for the third na pag-select. So we have first selection, second, and third. Then, how are we going to find the random variable? Okay. Since we have 3 production items, we can assume that there are 8 events. It's because we have base of 2 here, D and N. So, dalawang event. So, we have 3. So, therefore, 2 rest to the 2 rest 3, that is 2 times 2 times 2, that is 8 possible event. Okay, so how are we going to find out the possible value outcomes? We have D, 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 first event. We have D, D, D. The second event, we have D, D, N. So we have D, D, N. The third event, we have D, N, D. We have D and D. And the fourth event, we have D and N. We have D and N. So, tapos na tayo sa defective items. So, dito naman tayo sa non-defective items. We have N, N, N. Ito, tas ikalimang event, we have N, N, N. For the sixth event, we have N, N, D. We have N, N, D. And the seventh event is N, D, N. We have N, D, N. And the eighth event, we have N, D, D. We have N, D, D. Therefore, there are possible values kung tatlo yung i-select natin na production items. It's either defective ba siya or non-defective. Okay, so the question is, we are going to find out the number of defective items in each event. So for the first event, we have D, D, D. So, ilan ang defective items dyan? So, magkakaroon po tayo ng tatlo. So, our Y is 3. Another thing is D, D, N. So, may dalawang D. So, dalawang possible values of random variables. We have D and D. We have 2. We have D, N, N, 1. We have N, 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 walang D, therefore 0. We have N, N, D, isang D, we have 1. Another is N, D, N, we have 1. N, D, D, we have 2. Therefore, its outcomes, ma-determine natin kung ilan yung number of random variables of the defective item based of their outcomes. So this is how we're going to find a possible values of random variables in a chances or event. Okay, so congratulations. I hope that you understand for our lesson, okay, about the random variable. Okay, Next, this time, you're going to answer the activity. Comment your answers. What are you going to do? Just determine whether the given random variable is discrete or continuous. Diyan sa box, sa comment section, just write your answer. If the 1, 2, 3, 4 items, it can be discrete or continuous. Just write number 1, discrete, number 2, continuous. Take note, top 10 na makakuha ng perfect score, doon ko kukunin po yung i-rapo natin yung tatlo kung sino ang makakuha ng free na load. Okay. So, i-announce ko after 3 days, i-announce ko yung nakakuha ng perfect score, and then i-announce ko din po, i-comment ko dyan kung sino yung makakuha or makakaroon ng free load. Okay, so God bless everyone, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and views, and press the notification bell para updated kayo sa ating new video. So, bye-bye and God bless everyone.